Diddy Two Guns, Jeff Lewis, here with this week's Erie Fitness Lifestyle Podcast. In the absence of Lisa Kameni Foster, who is still recovering from the FUPA surgery. We hope to have her back a week from today, as per her words. So we'll see. We gave her off today, just because it's only been, a little over a week. So, so Jeff's filling in, and we are talking about, second timer on the podcast, we're talking about fitness myth busting. But first, we want to talk about the sponsor of this episode, Heroes Movement. So our second location, Movement Forever Fitness, is the home of Heroes Movement. You want to tell them a little bit about Heroes Movement?
Absolutely, yeah. So we partnered with Heroes Movement, and it is a nonprofit agency that was put together by some trainers that were working primarily with veterans, of all of the military services, and they wanted to do more. They wanted to basically help more veterans. They saw some of the things that they were dealing with once they came back, living in the States and things like that, and were dealing with a lot of things, and they were able to help them with that, and they wanted to do more, and so they formed this organization that basically partners with training-centric gyms like ours across the country, and really want to provide a completely free service for veterans, and so that's what we're doing. We're basically putting our service out there, for the veterans, within the area, and then we're really looking to kind of get that out there, get the word out, that not only that we have a free service, but more that we have a service that can help them, and through some of the things that they're going through mentally, physically. Or they just, they want a better workout experience, which is, what we're going to provide for anybody who's a member, of our facilities. And so we're super excited to get that program, kind of off and running. We just kind of announced the partnership on July 4th, and we're going to be, kind of continuing to build some momentum, as we get into the fall with that.
I think the cool part is that, because one of the issues with something like Silver Sneakers, where all you have to really do is follow their parameters of doing it, and you can be an affiliate, where Heroes Movement, it's more, they only accept training-centric gym and personal training sessions, and they have a vetting process. So there is a, double digits in the 20s, 30 affiliates who do it, and it's all training-centric gyms through a vetting process so that they know they're getting an expert experience, so we can provide a great service and do something, because we were as business owners, we're always looking to give back as one of our big things, and it's easier said than done when you look at it, because we can't just offer free training, right, because it costs an overhead. So when we have something where a company will reimburse for what we offer, all of a sudden it kind of makes sense, and now we can give back in a way that makes money. We don't make money, we don't lose money either, so it's nice and kind of tackle that. So super stoked that we're getting that. We have a couple of our close fitness professional friends across the country, former vets. We're trying to get them in also. They're going to be speaking on our behalf for the Heroes Movement. So something we're very much looking forward to, something that will be really cool for the Erie community.
Yeah, we're super excited to just continue to change the way fitness is done in Erie and then beyond as well. So it's definitely an exciting time.
Boom. So, busting myths.
Let's do it.
So first one, which is always a good one, and a lot of these, you hear them all the time, and you may say them or just not know any better. So the first one, we're going to look at the whole squats are bad for your knees, deadlifts are bad for your back, overhead presses are bad for your shoulders. Those are kind of the three big ones I tend to hear. I don't know if that's a little different for you, but they all kind of have a similar answer. Do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue with that is a lot of times those sayings, they actually come from the medical professionals. When somebody, like I'm dealing primarily with sports performance, dealing with athletes, and so injuries, they are a part of the game, and we're it's a big part of what we're trying to do is to reduce the likelihood of them. And the problem is when an athlete, they get injured in some fashion within their sport, and then they'll come back with like, okay, what are your restrictions? They're like, oh, I'm not allowed to squat. And it's like, why? did you ask why? And they usually don't. But it's one of those things where they're not bad. It's not a bad exercise. Depending on a number of factors, those factors in which we look at when it comes to our assessment, will determine whether or not squats are bad for you right now. Because that's the process that we're trying to uncover, is at the beginning, what's going to be good and what's going to be bad for you. Because, there's definitely movements that, with a lot of our athletes that come in, that, squats could be bad for you right now. And then it's our goal as fitness professionals to determine what are the steps needed to be taken from a movement corrective standpoint in order to get it to a point where, okay, now squats they're going to be a beneficial lower body exercise, for you. Same with deadlift, same with overhead press when it comes to that. And so those are all things that they need to be taken into account when your program is being built for you. It's not like, oh, you've been here for a month, so now we're going to squat.
Right.
Which is like, that's sometimes, they really made sure I had all the prerequisites. So we did something for a month, and now we're going to squat. It's like, well, not necessarily, because if you don't move well enough during the prerequisites, you're probably not going to be cleared in order to do squats effectively and safely. And so, those are all things that we take into account, and even as a consumer, or if you get hurt, it's like, doctor says I can't squat. Then I asked him why, and he didn't give me an answer, because a lot of times that's probably what you're going to get. And so, those are things that they're a little bit frustrating for someone like us that has the knowledge of, like, oh, we can get you, okay, you can't squat, but we can get you back squatting as quickly as possible. We're going to do this, this, and this, and then you're ready to go. And so those are things that we look at.
I always think it's funny. I always come back to I think it was Dan John who may have popularized it. Like, squatting isn't bad for your knees, but the way you squat may be bad for your knees.
Yes.
And whether it's because they don't necessarily know how to squat, they don't have appropriate prerequisites to squat. Like, if your ankle doesn't move, you're probably not going to squat well, right? If you don't have good hip flexion, you're probably not going to squat well. You don't have good hip external rotation, you're probably not going to squat well. But that doesn't say that squatting is bad per se. And then also, the thing I think about a lot is back squatting may be bad for your knees, but squatting isn't bad for your knees. Where, back squatting is when the barbell's on your back, where the misconception is like, that's a basic squat. When it's probably like the king of all squatting, the most demand of a squat pattern, where holding a kettlebell, a sandbag, something in front of you gives you a more advantageous lever, and all of a sudden you can squat real deep, pain-free, really well, where you couldn't necessarily with the bar on your back. You probably saw it. There's like a viral video of LeBron James squatting. And LeBron James is a giant.
Yes.
Right. When your femurs and your tibia, your upper leg and your lower leg, are this long, you're probably not going to squat on two legs that well. Right. So they were criticizing his depth, criticizing these things, but it actually was interesting because at the depth in which he couldn't maintain his hips anymore, he stopped. And that's an appropriate depth, because, like, how low should someone squat? Gonna wholly depend on that person, right? Because you make Jeff $1 million if you can ask to grass squat. Ankles aren't gonna do it, right? Where I can just get down there no problem, right? He can squat a house, I can't, right? But it's all dependent on what does a person's squat look like, because having an arbitrary version of what something should look like is detrimental and problematic, because the goal isn't to squat this depth. The goal is to squat whatever you can, right? Because another thing, like, oh, well, squatting below parallel is bad for your knees, but we see people who actually have the capacity to squat below parallel. Stopping at parallel actually is bad for their knees, right? Whereas if you can't, then the goal is to find your complete range of motion and you can kind of stabilize. And I think that parallels the same with deadlifts, same with overhead press. If you can't touch your toes, you probably shouldn't deadlift. If your overhead mechanic looks like this instead of this, you probably shouldn't overhead press, right? If your head has to do this when you overhead press, you probably shouldn't overhead press. But if you have the capacity, you should.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things, like, if I'm looking at, like, high school football players, just the stereotypical, like, okay, we have to squat, everybody has to squat to the same exact depth, the whole team. And it's like, my coach wants me to squat to here. And it's like, well, that's not going to be good for you, because you don't move that way. And it's like, we can still get strong, but your depth it needs to be individualized the same way your program is individualized. Because ultimately, at least the way we look at it, if we're going to have an athlete squat in any form, front squat, back squat, rear foot elevated split squat, whatever it is, it's like the ultimate goal is to get you better at the sport that you came in at. So it's not about, we're not powerlifters.
Right.
So yeah, you're LeBron James. You're the best basketball player maybe ever. We could debate, but like right now, like he's in everybody's top 5. It's like he's not there to squat, you know? And ultimately, like, even if we were to judge him based on that, like, I don't know how much weight was on the bar. It didn't look like that much.
Yeah.
But, like, there's guys that squat 1,000 pounds. LeBron James is doing 400. Doesn't matter. Like, that's 40%. Like, that's a failing grade in every form of academics. Like, it's not good, but let's judge him for what he does, not for his squat.
Well, and the 1,000-pound squatters who waddle up to the platform
Exactly.
can't poop, can't touch their toes, but they can squat 1,000 pounds, right? It's specificity that is very specific. Because the goal isn't to get better at squatting.
Exactly.
The goal is to get better at being human, whatever being human means to you.
Yes.
And at the high school thing, I'd always think, like, they do a bodyweight squat, and like, well, that's the depth you should go with the barbell. What? Like, that makes no sense, right? Just because they can do it with no weight doesn't mean they can do it with their upper body locked, a disadvantaged lever, and then, oh, well, you should be able to squat that low. No, like, not at all.
Yeah.
Right? And it's high school sports, that's fun. Next one we're going to talk about is strength training is bad, certain populations shouldn't strength train, and one of the issues with that is the implication of kind of what strength training is probably a place to start, where strength training doesn't necessarily mean lifting weights, though lifting weights may mean strength training.
Correct.
But strength training is so multifaceted, and that's what people need, right?
Yeah, and we look at it, just to steal a simple analogy, we'll just look at somebody that comes in, and really, I don't think it really matters whether they're 6, 16, or 60. Like, we're going to look at, okay, what buckets, we'll use an analogy of a bucket, like, what bucket needs filled up? And ultimately, like, if I'm looking at an athlete, like, the strength bucket needs to be at the top, and it really needs to be overfilled so that it trickles down into all the other buckets as far as like speed, change of direction, power and explosiveness, injury prevention, like all those things. Like strength there needs to be, really a sufficient level of strength as a foundation of athleticism that needs to be there. And so for the most part, regardless of what sport they play, like that's the priority of their programming. Again, it has to be age specific because there is a difference between strength training and like resistance training, where we're actually going to progressively overload the body with an external resistance. But it needs to be there, and we need to educate as to the importance of that, because we've sat down with a lot of parents, during our initial strategy sessions, and they're like, I don't want my kid lifting weights. And it's like, well, here's why that's not true. That's a myth.
Incomplete.
Yeah, exactly. And the benefit that strength training will have on the goals that you think your son or daughter needs, and that's I'm sure that's true. Like, they need to get faster. They need to jump higher. Yeah, they need to have their shoulders hurt less after their swim meets and things like that. Like, okay, great, that's their goal. But ultimately, like a big part of fixing that or getting you to the goal is they're weak as a kitten, and we got to get them there. Right. Yeah, we have to build that up.
Ideas that are propagated off of training that is bad cannot be universally applied, right? Because like bad strength training will not be good for a youth population, will not be good for a middle-aged, hyphens, like using that, female, right? But at the same time, that don't make a universal application based off of one sect of doing things wrong, right? Because strength training done wrong is bad for your joints. Strength training done wrong could damage a growth plate. Strength training done right will only help joints. Strength training done right will only serve and help growth plates, and all those things where, a lot of times people come in, especially on our female fitness side as opposed to the athlete side, which still does happen there, is they come in and the baseline variation of a squat they're doing is an assisted squat, right? So now we're actually taking weight off of your body weight, and that's still immensely strength training.
Correct.
Right? Because we know the quickest way to get you to your goals is something that's individualized to you, that picks on your weaknesses, that improves your weaknesses while not neglecting your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, that may look like strength training where, for me, deadlifting 500 pounds is an immense challenge where it's not for him, but making his hip internally rotate is a challenge for him, where not as much for me, where like, what does a person need, right? 90-90 internal rotation is strength training. 500 pound deadlift is strength training, where a 500 pound deadlift is like, he'd prefer to do that, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's easy, not easy, but it enjoys it and it suits his advantages.
Yes.
Right, and I think that's, what is strength training is probably one of the most interesting things, because outside of the fitness world, fitness professionals, people don't necessarily know. Like, they have an idea of what it was, and whether they see Arnold or they see a powerlifter or they see a strongman, where it's like that's a very specific. They wouldn't say that about a basketball player, but they'll say it about a bodybuilder, a powerlifter, and a strongman, where it's all still sport, right? And it's what is strength training? Whatever you need.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think it's finding out what that is, because I think when it comes to strength training, a lot of people are like, they'll pick the top person in their sport, and they'll be like, well, so and so doesn't do a whole lot of strength training, and then we just go back to those buckets. Their bucket is already filled.
Right.
It's as full as it needs to be, and that's ultimately, when we get athletes that they've been in the game for a long time. They're playing a professional sport, like that's their career, is to play a sport. Our programs look like that, where it's not about, okay, we know how strong you are. We've had professional athletes in here that have been here for multiple years, so we know what their strength level is, and the goal isn't to get like 10% better every year, because we have some professional athletes that are in their 30s, like their early 30s, where it's like, just based on scientific evidence, like, you're not going to get 5-10% stronger every year. It's going to go the other way if you don't do anything. So the goal is to get it to that point and then focus on what bucket needs filled the most to benefit them in their sport. And so a lot of times it's not strength training. It doesn't mean we don't do it, but it's not like, we're not going to push the pedal to the floor and try to get 5% stronger in all these lifts, because the return on investment is not there. And it could be a detriment, just based off of the longevity of their athletic career.
Right.
And so those are all things that we have to take into account when we design a program.
Yeah, because the goal of strength training is not to lift more weight. It's to get the provided or the goal stimulus, right? Because you can give me any person, and I could absolutely torch them with a 12 to 16 kilo kettlebell and a band behind them, right? And it's just because challenge and progressive overload is the goal, and that can be found a lot of ways, especially with the DVRT system that we mentioned prior on the podcast. We can actually make exercises harder and more challenging while decreasing the weight, and all of a sudden that applies to fat loss, move better, feel better, perform better, right? We have James Conner in here, and how do you make him sweat? Make him own his rib cage and his hips, right? How do you make him perform? Like, he can jump through the ceiling, right? But like, pick on all those little things, right? Don't neglect the strengths, right? But also let's adamantly work on like the leaks in the bucket, right?
Exactly.
Fill that bucket. So we're approaching two of my favorite myths. More is better.
It's funny that this ended up on our list of myths, because I actually talked about it with James Conner today, and there were others in the group, as far as like, we talked about, somehow we got on the topic of like the roles of our coaches. And it's really like the role of our coaches when it comes toward developing their program is to give them the least amount that will get them to their goals. And like, it seems like, especially for James, like, just like smoke just started coming out of his ears. He's like, that makes so much sense, because that's what you pay for. You pay for Goldilocks, just enough to get you to where you want to go. Like, it's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's right there in the middle, because ultimately, there's NFL players that, have gotten hurt in the offseason. It was too hot, and they got hurt, and it's like, now we're not talking about like, oh crap, I can't play this year. It's like, no, like, depending on your contract, your bank account might not reflect what it should have if you trained appropriately in those things. And so it's, those are all, we're always basically pulling on the reins a little bit of what we're doing, so that we can find that sweet spot of just right, as far as the stimulus that we provide for our athletes. And then also we might also do that by not by pulling back on the reins of what we're doing, but by hyper prioritizing in their own mind the recovery process that they go through on a daily basis. With that, and so those are things that we can affect as well, because ultimately, like, we want to hit that sweet spot every time, and it's just a mix of what they do in the hour and a half in here and what they do the other 22 and a half hours outside of here. And it's the culmination of those 24-hour windows that gives us the response we want or not. And we have to have our fingers on the pulse of that so that we know that we're hitting the mark day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, as we prepare them for their upcoming season. And so it's definitely it's a game that we play because it matters so much, that we don't want to overstretch them, because that's when injuries occur, and because we have complete control over the process, we need to control that.
Right. Well, and that which you cannot recover from actively hinders you. So going more and then not being able to recover, right? Because people say, "Oh, what happens in the gym isn't as important as what happens outside the gym," and it's one of those things like it's fair, but not to dismiss how important what you do in the gym is. But at the same time, when you're just constantly overloading yourself and you can't recover from it, something bad's going to happen. Whether it's burnout or overtraining, you don't want to work anymore, or God forbid an injury, right? Because a professional football player and a mom of 4 with a full-time job, like, both of those people getting injured is a massive disruption to their life. Absolutely. And one could probably argue even more detrimental to the mother of 4, depending on things, right? Because, James Conner, like, it might mean his career, right? Because he won't get another job. Or all of a sudden, who's going to take care of your kids when you're not doing these things? Because, your husband can't just not work, or like all these things, right? So getting injured is one of those things, because people, they talk about acute injuries all the time, like something that happened, but they don't necessarily talk about the obtuse injuries or the ones that came over time that just popped up because of the things you did over time, where micro trauma, all of a sudden it became a big issue.
Correct.
It was because you didn't recover from it, right? Because we always talk about, like, people, they can on their own do not enough, stay in their comfort zone, never work out hard enough, or they can run themselves balls to the wall, boot camp beat down the street, themselves into the ground until they can't do anything anymore. You can do those things on your own. You can get hurt on your own. You have to pay a professional to get hurt, right? So finding that middle ground where we have the Goldilocks, that minimum effective dose, where we're doing exactly what we need, because we have to work hard, right? It's not necessarily going to be easy, but it also shouldn't destroy you. Like, everything we do should empower you. It shouldn't break you down, right? And that's probably a good transition into the second myth in this section, is that tired is better, right? Everyone chasing tired. Like, I didn't get a good workout unless I'm in a puddle on the floor, dead with my shoes blown off after my WOD. Right? Where there's a lot to unpack there.
I almost lost my mind last night, Danny. I had 2 of my former athletes, meaning they're not here right now, participate in one of these Get Tired Bullshit workouts and post it on their Instagram. And it just boggles my mind that you have Division I athletes who, they know what it's all about.
Right.
Because not only have they done it here, but they also do it on campus.
Right.
And most of the feedback, Sarah Agnello's out there right now, Division I basketball player, like, the feedback we got when she went back to school last year was that what she did last summer in here, they so prepared her for the testing that they did and for the workouts that they go through in their preseason. Like, it was just spot on. It's like, great, thank you. Like, because we put a lot of time, energy, effort, into developing our program to make it easy when they go. And so to see that last night, that you have a very, very specific goal. One of them may or may not have had some very traumatic injuries in the past that require constant programming, in order to continue to overcome the fact that happened in her career. And to sit there and just, get your heart rate to 90% of max and punch a bag for an hour, it just it boils your blood, because that's not going to be the most effective training for them for what they need. Yeah, did they get tired? Did they check the box off as far as like, oh, we worked out? Yeah, but it's like
I was in red for 40 minutes.
yeah, it's like
Sounds like you got worse.
You sweat and you breathe hard when you play basketball. I sweat and I breathe hard when I punch this bag. They're not the same. Not at all.
Right.
And so it's, those are things that, we need to look at the specificity of training, especially when there's catastrophic injuries that we need to continually overcome because they never go away.
Right.
Yeah, and so those
they're with you for life because that's what they are.
Because that's what they are. And so it's it's frustrating, and who knows? Maybe it's an overreaction on my part. Maybe they were in town for one day and they say, "Hey, let's go punch a bag," and they went and punched a bag. Great. Yeah.
And that's the hard part, right? Because it probably isn't an overreaction because knowing said athlete we're referencing, like, and having trained her and knowing her excess mobility, lack of stability, though she's still really strong, right? What's like the worst thing you do to someone who has too much mobility and needs stability? Like jump up and down and do stupid shit.
Yeah.
Right? So it's probably not an overreaction because what percentage of the time does that person get injured there? Whether it's that something happens right there and they go down, or God forbid she gets injured in 3 weeks or at the start of her camp and it was the thing I did at camp. Was it? Or was it the stupid shit you did 4 weeks ago that pissed something off that led to a compensation that then was the straw that broke the camel's back? Right? So I it's people, and, I get criticized most often about this, probably because I'm the most vocal about it. But at the same time, like, I care about you, and I shouldn't be more upset about it than you are. Right? And it's, because you matter, your injuries matter, your progress matters, and you getting better matters. Right? It shouldn't matter more to me than it matters to you. Right? And I think we can hang on sometimes where people just don't know any better, and it's on us to educate, which is why we spend so much time educating. But when we see someone who's gone through our programs here and know what's better to actively choose to go there, then it's just frustrating because you can't say, well, they just don't know any better, right? Because they do and they choose to anyway. And then, who knows, right? It's like, chasing tired, you get more tired, right? Like chasing tired gets you tired. Tired isn't better, more isn't better, better is better.
Exactly.
Right? And that looks a lot of ways where getting sweaty and feeling like you worked out isn't the goal. Getting the progressive overload and the progress stimulus of your workout is your goal. You may be sweaty, right? You may be out of breath. There may be days where you're more out of breath than other days. There may be days where you leave the gym and you're like, I don't really feel like I worked out that hard, but I feel really good. It's the minority. You may leave some days feeling like, man, that kicked my butt. Not the majority. Where the majority is like you leave the workout feeling like you got a good workout, feeling better, moving better, having more energy, but knowing you got your workout in.
Correct.
Right? Where it's like you don't have to leave feeling like you're dead, right? Because, we joke about this all the time. I have 3 businesses, 2 kids under 2. I don't need more tired.
Right.
I need a lot less tired. Right? And so do most people, right? Where, you take a mom of 3, mom of 4, mom of 2, mom of 1 even, right? And she don't need more tired.
Exactly.
Right? She needs better. Right? And and that's another thing too. You see them going there, punching a bag until they get endlessly tired, running circles, doing mindless bullshit. And all of a sudden, like, you're no longer better to serve your myriad responsibilities, your kids, and what's the goal, right? Oh, take care of my kids, build a great life. Because what parent isn't their pillar goal, right?
Yep.
And it's like, well, what if what you're doing actively takes away from that, right? Like you couldn't do the things because you were too tired and you didn't get better, or God forbid again, you're injured and you can't do the thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Didn't expect it to go there, but worse. So I guess we'll branch off on a tangent from the heated topic, and we'll go with cardio is effective for fat loss.
This, I can probably bring a unique teaching point with this, because one of our mentors, Alan Cosgrove, who we just spent a few days with last week at our mastermind, he gave a talk. I don't know where he originally gave the talk, but he put together a talk called The Hierarchy of Fat Loss, where he basically did sort of a literature review of a bunch of weight loss / fat loss scientific journals and things like that, and he put them all together And I actually, I stole it, took it right from you, and I presented it to my class. I know I talked last time I was on about teaching at Mercyhurst this past spring, and I actually just did the talk. I had all the slides, I stole all the slides, and just presented it.
He didn't sell it, Alan.
I didn't sell it. Presented it to my kids who pay tuition. And it just, I think they were angry with me.
Right.
They were like, because even one of them was like, I was like, well, what would you do before I even started? Like, what would you do for weight loss? Like, what type of activities? And it was like one of the only nice days we had in the spring. I'm like, can we go outside? No. Like, because I have this talk that I stole, and I need to have it up there. I need my slides. And so I was like, no, we can't go outside. And I was like, well, we're talking about weight loss, so we can go for a walk. And I was like, do you think that would work? Right. And it was, basically like that sort of that long, slow cardio heart rate zone that they teach, because it's ultimately like that question came up right away. Like,
we learned this the hour before we were here.
Yeah, it's like, well, so like Dr. Chetlet and Mr. Harvey are they wrong? And I was like, I'm going to put a whole bunch of science up here on the board. That's why we're staying in here today. You answer the question. Right. I'm just here to present this information. And it was, they were kind of taken aback because it is really what the science says that works, is not always what is put out there. And the answer is always, well, why isn't it put out there? And it's like, and I don't necessarily know the answer to that.
My only theory is that people, they want to gravitate towards the things that are easier and more accessible, and want to hold on to things that they work, right? Like anyone can go for a jog, right? Whether it's on a treadmill, right? They can't do it well, oddly enough, but that's another rabbit hole, right? But anyone can just go do that run. Anyone can go do that walk. And like, if someone were to say like, jogging or walking in isolation is effective for fat loss, you could say that they're wrong. But if they just say it works, it's just incomplete, right? Because not that it doesn't work, it just only works after certain things.
Correct.
Right. And that's where the hierarchy comes in.
Yeah. Because it's not, those things are not, they don't work. Like, they're part of the hierarchy. They're just way down at the bottom. Like, if you check all these other boxes up first, and if you still have time, which no one does, because like most of our clients, it's 2 to 4 hours a week. Like, that's all that we can really expect from you, because life gets in the way of that. And so ultimately when we plan it out as far as like, well, I got to go on my runs, or I got to do my walking, it's like, okay, great, let's plan out your week. And it ends up being like, okay, like all that stuff kind of falls in like the 8 to 12 hour window of like, okay, if you have that amount of time, go ahead and do it.
Raise your hand if you have 12 hours a week to work out.
No, and we're here all the time.
Right.
We don't have time for that. And so, those are things that we have to look at it. And again, going back to the bucket analogy, like when it comes to fat loss, like strength training is the foundation of that program. It has to be. And so those are things that, and even when you look at it, like working with the athletic population, even if you're sitting down with a Gen Pop client and you're like, well, I want to look like this. Maybe it's T.O. who's staring at us. It's kind of weird.
Always.
But like a lot of aesthetic, I want to look like this person. A lot of times it's an athlete.
Right.
And what is usually the foundation of their developmental program is strength training. And so it's like, okay, let's start connecting some of these dots and things like that, because it is a hard sell. Even when you present a bunch of scientific evidence to students that are, sitting there as sponges looking to kind of soak it up. There's still a little bit like, that's interesting. And it's like, they did a diet. The group did a diet. The group did cardio and a diet program, and the other did strength training and a diet program. And like, diet works. Diet and cardio, like little bit, like they lost, like in most of the studies, it was like 1 or 2 pounds more over like 8 weeks. So it's like, they're tired and hungry. And then like the strength training group, they lost considerably more. And it's like, and the time frame was way less. Instead of doing 45 minutes 6 days a week of cardio, they were doing 3 hours a week of strength training with their diet. and they lost, 25-35% more fat in that one study. And so it's like,
and let alone the muscle that was gained too.
exactly, because it's about fat loss, it's not about weight loss, and that's a lot of times that's a touch point when you're trying to educate people, because they do get fixated on, I need to weigh this, and it's we'll have challenges where that is a focus, but it's not always. It's never just the focus. We want you down 20 pounds. It's all about fat lost, muscle gained, percentage of body fat. It's always a factor.
Fat loss and weight loss are not the same, right? And I think the cool part about that study is just two things they did. One is that in that strength training group, in which lost the most amount of fat and gained the most amount of muscle by far, it actually wasn't a great strength training program.
Correct.
Whereas if you do that study again and give them an individualized, specific, good strength training program, who knows how much more it would have been. And the other cool part is that they branched off from the cardio ones, and they just kept increasing the quantity. Well, okay, this amount doesn't work. Let's go 50% more. Let's go 100% more. Let's go 200% more. And not only did it not work better, there was actually an inverse curve where the more they did, the actual worse they got.
It was a detriment.
They gained fat, they lost muscle, and all of a sudden, the scale may have moved.
Correct.
Right? Because I think we talk about that a lot, especially with the Gen Pop, is the problem with the average female who comes in here. She's fad dieted, she's yo-yo dieted, how many times? 4 or 5 times. She lost 20 pounds, she gained 20 pounds, she lost 30 pounds, she gained 30 pounds. The problem with that is when you lost it, you didn't lose just 20 pounds of fat or just 30 pounds of fat. Right? Ideally you do it really well, but in those cases you probably didn't, where say you lost 20 pounds, you lost 10 pounds of muscle, 10 pounds of fat. When you gained it back, you probably gained 18 pounds of fat, 2 pounds of muscle.
Right.
You do that again, and all of a sudden you end up at the same absolute weight, but you end up 10 to 20 pounds of fat.
You end up fat.
Heavier, right? So now your body fat is higher, you're a lot less healthy, you don't function as well, and all of a sudden you've lost weight or you stayed the same, but you've dramatically hindered your progress. We tell personal story, like when I was 200 pounds, stick thin, I'm 6'4", so 200 pounds is thin. I felt terrible. I looked good, right, on the outside, but at the same time, it was just an under-muscled, under-fueled, over-fat version of the same 300-plus pound self that started there.
Right.
Where, being 250 is 50 pounds fatter than 200, except it was probably 40 to 45 pounds of muscle, and all of a sudden, it's, wow, I feel better, I move better, but now I'm obese on the BMI, right, and we have all these rabbit holes where, the weight on the scale lies, right, and fat loss, weight loss, right, because cardio is effective for weight loss.
Correct.
In isolation. It is not effective for fat loss in isolation. It is a great supplement to your workouts, right, but it is not, the pillar workout. Right, and that's, I think, too, because 2 to 4 hours in the gym, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not trying to be active outside the gym, because we try to educate a lot. We're like, take an inventory of how much time is spent in front of a TV, right? And not necessarily eliminate it, but like maybe do something else while you do it, and just on the ground, fidget, right, and all these things. But also, let's take the energy, the strength, the movement ability, and then translate it into doing more things, right? Because like, how many kids don't want to do the things? Right? Now, no, they want to do things, right? So go do it with them, and let that be your cardio, right? Like, don't do more of that shit in the gym.
Exactly.
Right? Like, do more of that with the people who enjoy it, because we talk about this all the time. The goal of working out isn't to do more workout things. It is to do whatever you wish to do and spend your time doing.
Correct.
Right? Joe Joseph mentioned injury to running ratio. So that's another point we haven't even mentioned in terms of the cardio thing, is that, if you are a consistent jogger, runner, you have the 50% likelihood of injury. Right? 50%, right? So like, if there's 2 of you watching this, look at one of you. If you're both consistent runners, you're going to get hurt, right? So people like, squatting is bad for your knees, you can get hurt. Deadlifting is bad for your back, you can get hurt. You know what, number one, the most injurious thing we can do is sit 8 hours a day. Just to give context, right? One of the second most ones is to go jogging on a consistent basis, right? Because, They think, oh, it's body weight, you should just do it. The amount of force on a stride in your jog is immense. Right? Depending where you look, 5 to 7 times body weight, whatever. But also, that is immense.
Yep.
Right? And it's like, oh, well, you shouldn't squat past this. No, you shouldn't 5 to 7 times body weight force on one leg.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And again, like if we did a workout where you hopped on one leg, 1,500 reps, switched, 1,500 reps on the other leg, you'd say it was insane. But if you do it alternating legs, you call it jogging a mile.
Yep.
Right? And all of a sudden you put it into context and you're like, wow, that doesn't seem like a good use of my time.
Right.
And you look at the average runner, they go for their run, and all of a sudden after, they're like, man, I feel great. By the way, my hips, knees, shoulders, low back, all kill. Mm. Right? Because runner's high must mean it's working.
Yep.
Right? Where like you actively feel like crap after it, which, again, running isn't bad. Running bad is bad, and only running is bad, right? Because the other part, like the reason the injury rate on jogging is so high is it's the only exercise your form can go to utter and complete crap, and you go 5 more miles.
Yep.
Like no other exercise falls into that, right? And then when you look at it that way, you're like, oh, and again, people don't take diligence to how physically intensive and complicated running is. Like the physical therapy world spends hours upon hours upon hours doing gait analysis, right? Because it matters, right? And if you're going to do something 3,000 steps per mile,
right,
like let's do it well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And let's not rely on a shoe company
Right.
to say that we're doing it well, because just because you put a Band-Aid on it doesn't,
Right.
It doesn't take away from the fact that like this is an injury or an injury waiting to happen,
Right.
just waiting for some joint to get to a capacity in which some of the structural integrity is lost and tissue is damaged and things like that. And so, those are things that, we have battle at, because there are some people that they run so much that, they're getting like a runner's high from that. It's a big part of, the endorphin response they get from exercise is from that. And it actually is, based on if you're running for that long, it means that something is chasing you, and eventually it will catch you and it will eat you and kill you, and so therefore you feel good one last time in your life, from a historical standpoint, with that. And so it's one of those things that oftentimes when we're working with athletes, a lot of our recommendation is don't go for that run.
Right.
Because unless you're a distance runner, which if you are, then that's specific to the sport and the reason that you're in the training process. So obviously it's going to be a part of that. We're trying to uplift the potential that you have genetically in order to run your best time, those kind of things. But if that's not the goal, especially if you're a team sport, strength and power athlete, like, no, we'll give you something to do when it comes to conditioning, but it'll be more specific and not detrimental to the overall training process and things like that, because those are again, that myth is out there. It's like, oh, I'm a professional athlete and I just ate a whole pizza, I'm gonna go for a run. It's like, we could probably you can probably forgive your sins in a better way. Not that that's appropriate to do anyways. It's like you ate a pizza, fine, whatever. But like, those are things that we just have to continually educate people, even when they bought in, because it's, they're all myths that are out there, and they're not going to go away.
Well, anything like relevant now, like the World Cup, the big thing was like, oh, so and so ran 7 miles during the game. Like, how do you get better at that? It's not by running 7 miles. Like, number one, he didn't jog 7 miles. Like, he sprinted, he stopped, he sprinted, he stopped, he jogged, he sprinted, right? But also, the way to get better at that is not to do more of that. Like, you get enough of that, right? A soccer player, basketball players, the high endurance-based sports, right? That move and run a lot. Like, the way to get better at that is not to do more of that. It's to get more efficient and get stronger and get better at doing that. And it's not by doing more of that. Like, hey, I do this thing all day. I'm going to train doing more of this thing all day. You're like, oh, shouldn't you need something else? Right. Probably. Right.
And I'll always trick if I have a basketball player. Like, oh, I can't train in the fall. Why not? I'm running cross country. Okay. I'm not knocking cross country. If that's what you do, that's great. But like,
Well, if that's your sport,
if that's your sport,
rock
that's
it.
great. But if
Right.
you're doing cross country to get ready for basketball season, you're doing more harm than good, because the specificity of those two activities really couldn't be any more on the outside of the bell curve.
Well, right.
As far as like the physical qualities that you need to express in cross country, there's no crossover when it comes to basketball.
Right.
Yeah, where like obviously a team sport like basketball, there's a lot of things that kind of play in the middle here, but cross country really doesn't touch any of them, other than sort of the logical connection that we run a lot in basketball, let's run a lot in cross country, which the dots don't connect.
No.
Yeah, when you look at the physiology of what's happening.
Yeah, doing like endurance running, slow twitch, long duration, low output. What is basketball? Short, intense, high output, many times. Right?
Repeated.
When you look at it that way, like those are not the same.
Not at all.
Mike Boyle, famous strength and conditioning coach, you train slow, be slow. Train fast, be fast. Right? But again, like that's the thing. Like, and again, if you're an endurance runner, there are ways we can train to make you better at being an endurance runner if that's your sport. Right? But let's not confuse training with the sport. Correct? Because there's so many differences. Right? We saved the biggest rabbit hole for last, but maybe since we ranted so long, we'll save it for another time.
We could do that.
Right. Any comments or anything to add, Joe Joseph?
Just checking.
No? Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching our fitness ranting. We'll see you next week, hopefully with hyphen, even though Jeff did stellar in her absence. Sweet. Take care.